So I want to ask you a question, and you can participate in this if you want, but who has met somebody really famous? All right. Nikki, who did you meet?
George Strait.
Who?
George Strait.
Oh, George Strait. That's a funny story, but that'll take a different road. Jenny.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold Schwarzenegger. Anybody else want to share somebody famous they met? Kevin?
John Boyd.
John Boyd. That's awesome. This is Seinfeld. Joseph, did you have somebody? Peyton Manning. All right. I'm a little bit lacking in this area personally in my life. I don't really get to meet very many famous people. My one claim to fame of famous person that I've ever met is the Jim Carrey. The mayor of Muncie, the ex-mayor of Muncie. Not the actor. You know, I got to meet him one time. So that's it. That's it. But last summer, this was all going to change for me. So last summer, the girls are at the Halteman pool, and I'm dropping one of them off during lunch or something, and I see April and Kim Bennett over across on the other side of the pool, and about 4 chairs away from them sits none other than, and now you guys may not care, but I do, Ryan Kerrigan of the Washington Redskins. Does anybody care? No. But I did, because I've been a Redskins fan since I was a little kid. When I was in junior high, I had this little canvas hat. You guys remember these with the tails that come off the back, and it said Washington Redskins? So I was pretty cool then, too. So he's sitting like 4 chairs away from April and Kim, and I'm thinking, this is cool. So I walk, I got to look like an NFL player, so I'm, not at all close, but I walk, as steadily as I can by him, and he doesn't acknowledge me at all. And I get over to April and Kim, and he's kind of sitting behind me, and I say, "Do you know who that is?" And they're like, "No." I'm like, "That's Ryan Kerrigan." And I think Kim says, "Who's that?" And by the way, I know they noticed him. They just didn't know who he was, because he's like this hulk of a man, 6'4", 280, just looks like Thor with no shirt on. They noticed him. They just didn't know who he was. But that's a different story as well. So I'm trying to educate them without him hearing behind. I'm like, his first NFL game, he blocked Eli Manning's pass and ran it back for a touchdown. That's what he did. He's awesome. He's got a 4-year, $8 million contract. He's also rich, right? So, their interest, I'm sure, were more perked. But, I'm sitting there talking about him, and my heart starts pounding, because I'm like, I'm going to meet this guy. And, he's a hero of mine, and, he's like 22 years old, and I'm like 42-year-old, like, school kid in the schoolyard thinking he's going to meet some little girl. So that's where I'm at. My heart's just pounding. And I finally go through all these scenarios of what I'm going to say to the guy. And I turn around, and he's halfway out of the pool. He's left. And I, again, don't meet anybody famous because of my own inability to do so. But I don't want to focus on Ryan Kerrigan. I want to focus on my reaction. And we talk a little bit about, Tom mentioned a little bit with Garrett too, but my reaction to meeting someone famous. My heart starts pounding, my pulse goes up, I get nervous. All these things start running through your head, and I'm like, why? And, I think part of it is we kind of worship these people. And that's reserved for God, but I had this feeling of worship for Ryan Kerrigan, whom some of you went to high school with, probably in this room, so he's probably not all that famous to you, but we tend to worship these things. And that's really what I want to talk about today. I want to spend some time talking about God calling us to worship. And that's the illustration up above. But let's start with prayer. God, we come to you today, and we just seek to find you. We seek to find what you're calling us to in your worship. And God, I just ask that you be with us and you open our hearts, that we might have open minds and that we might be challenged by your word. And Lord, help me get out of the way of the message that you have. And God, just help us to come to your feet and know that you are Lord of all. In your Son's name I pray. Amen. So I start asking this question, God's calling us to worship him. And how are we answering that call? On an iPhone, and I assume other phones, you got this little remind me button. I think a lot of times when we see God's calling us to worship, we're really busy. And we're like, I'll call him back in a little bit. Remind me later. I'll call him back in an hour. Kind of thing. So we go through this of letting other things kind of come in. And I started thinking about what are those things that we let our lives get crowded in. And I started looking at the world, not just in these four walls, but around the world too. What do we worship? What are we worshiping? And I don't think you have to look very far. I think you can just look at our culture. You look at Katy Perry or Justin Bieber. You know, they each have 50 million Twitter followers. That's unbelievable. 50 million Twitter followers. They're clearly being worshipped or called to worship. You also can take a look at what we spend our money on as a culture. You know, personal sports equipment for us in our soccer games and basketball and all the things that we do, we spend $46 billion a year. That's a $46 billion industry of personal sports equipment. So we're spending our time doing that. I started looking at other things. We spent $23 billion on music concerts, $17 billion on video games. Now that's pointing a pretty big finger back at myself, if you know me. And last night, to get prepped for this sermon, I played with a bunch of guys on Xbox, including Joseph and some of them. So this sermon is really reaching to me as much as it is to any of you. So, you know, when Sam said, hey, I want you to preach on worship, I'm like, great. I love worship. I love being on the worship team. This is awesome. And then I started peeling the layers of it, and I'm not so awesome at it. You know, it's something that I really struggle with. Up here is great, but when I walk outside of these doors into the world, it's something that I really, really struggle with. You know, and a couple other things, you know, our professional sports teams, you know, I threw out the Washington Redskins and my worship of Ryan Kerrigan, that is my own failure too, but, you know, they lead the pack in professional sports, NFL does, with over $400 billion spent. Each team has a value of over $1 billion. You know, so you could say, do we worship those things? I don't know if everybody does, but I do think our culture has done that. And maybe we need to take a look at ourselves and say, how much time are we spending doing this? And so I kind of wanted to talk about where we're spending our time on the things that we're doing. And is it a worship or just spending our time? And that's the question I want you to wrestle with here. And if it's distracting you from God, then it's worship. If it's taking you away from the time you have with God, then it is worship. I want in kind of along the same pool story, I want to tell you a different pool story with a more famous person. And you can look this up later. I'm gonna just talk over it, but look through this. It's John chapter 5, and there's a different pool. It's outside of the sheep gates in Jerusalem. And this pool, as it's described in John 5, is surrounded by a multitude of sick people. And that's how he describes it. And when you look at, in my mind, I look around that pool and I just see all these desperate people. And the purpose of that pool in John 5, as he describes it, is when the water stirred in that pool, the first one to jump in that pool will be healed of whatever infirmity they have. So if that were true, they would have tons of people, right? If you're thinking about that, if we had a pool here in Muncie that if you were sick, you could go there and first person to jump in, it would be a crowded, crazy mess, right? Well, Jesus walks up to the edge of that pool and he sees this man that's crippled and has been there for a long time. And he asks the man, do you want to get well? And I thought, that's a pretty weird question. Do you want to get well? Obviously he wants to get well. He's sitting here. But the weirder thing is the way the man answers Jesus, I think, is he goes into a rant, kind of, and not a long rant, but a short rant of, no one will pick me up and no one will help me get into the pool. Somebody rushes in front of me and I can't be healed. See, he's completely oblivious. He's worshiping the creation, which is this water, this pool, and he's got the Creator standing a foot away from him, and he's completely oblivious. And I think we're not a whole lot different than that. You know, we got all this busyness, we got all these things in the world, and we have access to the Creator of the universe, and we choose to fill it with other things. And that's kind of one of the things I want to talk to you about. And that God has built us with this like hole, right, in our hearts. And that hole, He created us to worship, and we're grabbing things in the world and we're filling it up and we're pushing him further and further away. And that's evident, I think, in our society, but I also think it's prevalent in our church as well. And one thing that I want to talk about that probably is a sensitive issue for some of us is, are we worshiping our children in this society? If I were to ask you that one-on-one, are you worshiping your kids? I think a lot of people would immediately say, no, I'm not worshiping my kids. That's crazy. But then you look at how much time we're spending on it. We have an obligation to raise our children, right? And spend time with them and love them and train them and bring them up. And all of those things are great, but I think our culture has crossed a line to where we almost idolize our children and we worship our children. And we feel like they have to be in every event to have a fulfillment in their life. And what we do is we fill it up with all these events, and they miss the fact that God's the one that's actually supposed to fill that hole. And recently, April and I faced a challenge for this. And if you know my girls, Anna and Lily's my 11 and Anna's my 6-year-old. And gymnastics is king in our household. The couch is generally in a vault, and it's pretty much destroyed by kids vaulting off into it. And we have a balance beam, we have a bar that they spin around on. Gymnastics, my kids are probably upside down more than they are right side up. They love that sport. And the Twisters asked Lily to join. It's a kind of a traveling team, and they go around the state. And we agreed to do that as long as it didn't interfere with our worship. And we thought the meets were going to be on Saturdays. And then as we started getting more and more into it, the meets started appearing at 7:30 on Sunday morning in Lafayette or 7:30 in Indianapolis. And we started looking at it, and we started being really challenged by this. And one of the things that we had to consider was, are we going to let gymnastics come in front of us? Because we made this integrity and this commitment to God that this would not get in the way. And we sought advice from a lot of people, and we had conversations with a lot of people, and some of the things we heard were, yeah, you should get out of that. We also heard, it's only 4 or 5 Sundays a year. What's the big deal? There's 52 weeks in a year, 4 or 5 Sundays. I got 4 girls. If they each want to be in a sport, that's 20 weeks. And that lands on Sunday. If they each want to be in multiple sports, and more outside of the school, the sports are on Sundays. And so it becomes a tougher and tougher choice. And so I started thinking about, where are we going to be? So 20 weeks a year, then we're 40 weeks a year, and then 2 years down the road, we're disconnected. We don't know anybody in this church. We don't know why we've fallen away. We still feel like we're really spiritual people, and we wonder where we went wrong and why we don't know anybody. And I've seen that happen in people's lives, and we just said, you know what, we got to make a stand early, and it's not going to be a travesty if my girls are not Olympic gymnastics people, right? And as a matter of fact, I started thinking about that, and let's say they were gymnastics Olympians, and if they don't know the love of God, and they are Olympic gold medalists, then I failed as a parent. My role is to let them know the unconditional love of God, and that's why they're in my life, and that's why God gave them care to me. And, I don't want to be legalistic, so hear me right. Sports are great for kids. Dance is great for kids. It helps all kinds of things. It helps them socially, it helps them emotionally, and all of those things. And I think they're wonderful. But I think what we've done in our society is we've crossed that line at a lot of times where we've said sports, dance, all these other things are more important than you, God. And we start taking that whole, and we start taking God out and making room for each one of these things. And pretty soon, we're a couple years down the road, and we don't even recognize our lives, and we wonder how we got here. And so that was one of the things we wrestled with, and we did one of the toughest things I've ever had to do. We sat down with Anna, and we sat down with Lily. And by the way, Lily quit basketball because she wanted to go full-time gymnastics, by the way. So we sat down with Lily and Anna and told them they had to quit the sport they loved. And, sorry, you sit down with your kids and you take away something that they love, but you sit down and you talk to them. I sit down and we talk to them about we said God was going to be first in our lives and in our family, and this is where the rubber meets the road, and it was. And I'm, if your kids have meets on Sunday, I'm not going to argue with it. I'm telling you what it meant to our family. And what we said was this was not going to get in our way. And we made that stand with our kids, and we'll continue to make it. But I can tell you, making those stands are some of the hardest things that you may ever have to do. But the question I would have is, that phone's ringing to worship, and the same message is who you're going to worship. God's calling you. Are you hitting the remind me later? Your kids are calling you. The world's calling you. Sports teams are calling you. All these people are calling you to devote your life to them and put them in front of God. And I would say that I myself have to worry about who I'm worshiping. Am I putting God first in my life? And that's the real question. The one thing I want to mention to you too is, we ask ourselves this if question all the time. If I could just get that new job, if I could get that new promotion, that new house, that new car, those new whatever it is, if I could just be in so-and-so's spot, I would be happy with life. And so I started kind of going down that road of saying, I look at people who have taken God out and put other things in, are they really happy? And all you really have to do is flip through the Disney Channel, and it's kind of been a sad joke, but which is the next Disney star that's going to go to jail? They're on top of the world. And I'm not dissing Disney. I think there's some good shows on there. But there's been you may know this, but there's been over 16 Disney stars been arrested for drugs, alcohol, drunk driving, one even for manslaughter. Are they, they're people we would view as on the top, but they're not. There's another person, and we're going to show a video here, Jamie, if you can cue it up. But, I want to show you somebody who's still would be considered on top. And Tom Brady, and I know some of you guys are Colts fans, and I'm sorry, but I think it's undeniable that he is one of the best quarterbacks that's ever played the game in his sport. He has a supermodel wife and millions of dollars. And this is an interview that took place on 60 Minutes. You can go ahead and play it, Jamie.
Tom Brady, the quarterback of the New England Patriots, is not only one of the NFL's best players, he's one of the NFL's great stories. At the tender age of 30, he has already won 3 Super Bowls, an accomplishment that ranks him with some of the best quarterbacks ever to play the game. And he's having one of the greatest seasons in pro football history. When we first reported on him back in 2005, he seemed underrated and almost overlooked. He doesn't have the arm of Peyton Manning, and he doesn't have tattoos, and he doesn't take steroids, and he's never held out for more money. All he knows how to do is win. This is what you always wanted.
You're right. It has. And I didn't think it came with all the other baggage, though.
In addition to his success on the field and his sex appeal off it, there is also the $60 million 10-year contract to play with the Patriots.
I mean, I'm making more money now than I ever thought I could ever make playing football.
But with all that money, fame, and career accomplishments, we were surprised to hear this from him.
Why do I have 3 Super Bowl rings and still think there's something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey, man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life is... Me, I think, God, it's got to be more than this.
What's the answer?
I wish I knew.
Again, success and doing hard work is also can be, we're doing that for God. So I don't want to throw that under the bus, but when you take that hole in your heart that God designed for you and you take him out of it, it's never going to be filled properly. You're taking a round hole and you're trying to fill it with square pegs, and there's always going to be gaps, right? There's going to be gaps in there, and you're going to wonder why. So success, those kinds of things aren't bad in themselves, but when they replace God, they are. There's a biblical example of Tom Brady, and I don't necessarily want to call him Tom Brady, but there's a biblical example very similar in Ecclesiastes. And the author of Ecclesiastes is King Solomon. And if you read Ecclesiastes 1, I'm going to quote a few things out of that, but feel free to do that. And sometimes it feels like a depressing book, so what I want to not do is be depressing. But King Solomon, you could relate a little bit to Tom Brady in the fact that, he was wealthy beyond imagine. He was actually one of the wisest kings to ever live. He had beautiful wives. He had statues and monuments. He had everything. And he wrote, in Ecclesiastes, he wrote, "No one remembers the former generations, and even those yet to come will not be remembered by those that follow them." So he even knew people like Tom Brady one day are going to be forgotten. And the phrase that kind of echoes as a theme throughout Ecclesiastes is everything is meaningless and chasing after the wind. And, if somebody were to tell you in your life what you're doing is you're chasing after the wind, everybody knows that can't be grabbed a hold of and can't be caught. You're thinking, if I can just get that and put that here, life will be great. And then as soon as you put it there, some other wind blows and you're chasing after it next. And the only thing that fills that hole is God. And, I heard a phrase one time that's kind of stuck with me. And they said, if you do enough for mankind, you might be lucky enough to have a statue built in your honor that future generations of pigeons can use as their restroom. Right? So there's statues that don't mean anything when we start living for the temporary instead of living for the creator of the universe in eternity. Again, there's this hole that's being filled. And these people are searching for it. You see that in Tom Brady. You could see it in his voice. He doesn't know what he's missing. He's got everything. As I said, we were designed for worship. And I want you to look at this verse, Isaiah 43:21. It says, "The people I formed for myself, so that they may proclaim my praise." So I want to break that down just real quick. And God said, I formed you with a purpose. And that purpose is to worship me, to praise me. That is our purpose on this earth. And as a church and a body, we come together and we worship. And we go out in the world and we share light in a dark world. And that's our job. Our job is not to judge this world. Our job is to share life and light with the world. And that is a pretty good description of our heart, I think, where God says, I've created you so that you might worship me. And anytime you start filling that creation with other stuff, grabbing it out of the world and filling it in, we're pushing God away. We're going to show one more video here, and I want to kind of give you a preference. We played Ren Collective was the opening song. I wanted to kind of introduce these guys, and they're an Irish Christian band that I really like. But they have a discussion that I tried to kind of write out and figure out how I was going to say it, and I just finally decided we're just going to play the video because they're super cool and they're a lot cooler than me. But they have a great description of what I think two things is what it means to worship God and what it means to be a church. Because the reality is it's hard to worship God when we're out on our own. And so, Jamie, you can go ahead and play this next one. This is a little bit longer video, but go ahead.
Is there anything quite like a campfire? The community that's built there by people sharing their stories and singing their songs is truly special and so intimate. It's like being 10 years of age again and sharing all your secrets with your best friend. And that openness and vulnerability is exactly what we should see in the greatest community on earth, the church. There are no walls out here, and there should be no walls of defense towards God or each other, even if we have been hurt. Worship isn't just confined to the four walls of a church building, and it's certainly not exclusive, but it's for every human being on this planet. In the kingdom of God, there are no outsiders. We need to be careful not to allow hurt or cynicism to drive us from church. Otherwise, we end up like a branch taken from the fire, lifeless and cold. I know the pain we experience in life can be overwhelming, but we aren't meant to go through it alone. Jesus wants to set the church on fire so the world can warm themselves around us and find light and safety. We are here on earth to be a home and a refuge for the lost and broken. But first, we must learn the art of togetherness and celebration. To welcome people into the party of true freedom found in Jesus, we first must be students of that very way of life. We need to learn to celebrate. We need to choose His joy. We are the church. We are the hope on earth.
We are your church, oh, and we are the hope on earth. Come on, church, build your kingdom here, let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand, heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire in this nation.
Be on a journey as God's family, going through the highs and lows of life, suffering and laughing together. That's what I want. Not some holy huddle where we all pretend everything is okay, but a real community who believes in the God of miracles, but also in the God of the trials. That's what the world needs too. So let's give out the invites, put aside our selfish ways, and celebrate Jesus round the campfire.
They have great music too, and one of the things Jonathan was playing guitar up here when we practiced on Wednesday said let's kind of make this an acoustic worship, and I thought, that's pretty cool because one of the things we're going to talk about is really the campfire, and it's a much more intimate world, but it's that where have we stopped celebrating Jesus? Sometimes we come into church and we're solemn, and we're a lot of times we're not in a celebrating mood. And when we come in here, not even in these four walls, when we walk outside of here, people should see Jesus on us. They should see that excitement and passion that we have. And I love the description that Gareth gave of, when we start putting, and I'm kind of adding a little bit to what he said, but when we start putting things in our life that pushes God out, we're like that stick out of the fire. And we quickly cool off. And we don't know why we've cooled off, but we don't have the warmth of that community and that love that we're all there worshiping together. And I think, Harvest here, I think we do a great job of that. I think there's always ways that we can improve. But I believe that this is a group of people who believes in the God of miracles, but also believes in the God of trials. And I'm excited to be a part of that, and we should celebrate that. And musicians, you guys can come back up and just one closing thought kind of as you do that. When we worship God and we put God first, it will be noticed in this world. And when you get that call, obviously it's not a call to your iPhone, but when you get that call, the next time you say, I'm going to put something else in front of God. Because I think a lot of times it's not even a conscious decision. Oh yeah, that's on Sunday. We're going to go to that. That's okay. We're too tired. We're not going to go. It's not. Church isn't for you as much as it is to worship God and let people know that you're truly worshiping the Creator of the universe and not His creation. And so I just want to close, and we're going to stand and sing invitation. And if you feel like you've got some things in your life you need to lay down and say, I'm gonna try to put God first, you can come up here and pray if you want. If you want to talk to me, that's great. If you don't, if you just want to be with you and God, that's awesome. But we're going to close in prayer, and then they're going to sing, and then you're free to go. God, we come to you, and I first want to say I'm sorry for the things I put in my life that have crowded you out. And God, this has been an awesome challenge to me preparing for this sermon, that I should know you are first, you are King, and you are the Creator of the universe, and you deserve to be celebrated. And God, help us to do that. In your Son's name I pray. Amen.